Hello, and welcome into the Slow Ready Podcast, a casual drive into the music and culture of Goose. I'm Alex,
And I'm Mike.
and we're back this week with another exciting episode where we're going to recap the 2024 Dream Setlist that all of you helped us create. But before we get into all of that, we got a bunch of housekeeping to take care of. It's been 2 weeks since our last episode, so to kick it off, the best way to keep up with us and the podcast is via our social media at Slow Ready Pod. We're the best about keeping up with Instagram, I think, but we're everywhere. Blue Sky, Facebook, TikTok. We're so back, baby. YouTube, even. You can even shoot us an email, slowreadypod@gmail.com. We love hearing from you on anything, whether it's thoughts on episodes, anything you want us to feature, you name it. We're here to talk with you. So just wanted to shout that out. And then we've gotten a lot of new listeners, especially since Soulshine. So I just wanted to take a step back for a minute since we haven't really discussed this since our first episode, but just wanted to talk about the purpose of why we decided to make this show. Gotten a lot of feedback about it, and people were just curious about why we had the name or things like that. So I thought it'd be a good moment to get into it. So we designed the show with the idea that we wanted it to be a welcoming and accommodating space to slowly bring along new Goose fans, along with a jumping point for people who might be intimidated by the catalog or anything like that. Just somewhere safe and soft to land and learn a little bit about Goose. But we also want to have something entertaining for diehard fans to listen to each week. So, I mean, even with that in mind, we selected the name Slow Ready Podcast with that idea in our heads. You know, a song that diehards and new fans can really get into, and the name's kind of cheeky with that in mind. Anything else you wanted to add there, real quick, Mike?
Not much. I mean, you totally nailed it. That really is kind of the goal, is to, be a welcoming spot for new fans. And then, also trying to balance that with, stuff that appeals to everyone in the Goose community. Because obviously Goose is our favorite band. We're very passionate about them and just want to share that passion with new and old fans alike.
Yeah, totally. And with that in mind, you can kind of see that vision really reflected in our first few episodes of 2025 so far. Really kind of going a little bit back into the end of 2024, but just wanted to plug some of those so we can kind of see the scope and the idea of that. So going back into the end of last year, like I said, we did our recaps. If you're into recaps of shows and geeking out about jams and sets, so we recapped Goosemas and the Austin New Year's Eve run in episodes 15 and 16. And then we pivoted right away and we went into episode 17, which is our 2024 Goose Yearbook. And we reflected on an amazing year of 2024, best year yet for the band through the lens of a high school yearbook. A lot of laughs in that one, pretty unhinged and silly. Got into some superlatives and some really funny moments. So that's kind of a looser, more chill episode. And then our latest episode, episode 18 before this one, was an analysis of Goose's Dripfield, their studio album, latest one at the time of this recording. And we just broke down each track via the studio cut and then also looked at some of our standout live versions of each cut. Anything I missed there, Mike?
No, it's been a lot of fun, and I think if people continue to tune in, you're going to experience a lot of the same thing. We're going to try and keep this going in the same kind of methodology, rather, as far as a variety of topics covering every angle of Goose that we can think of, and things that you would probably find interesting or enjoyable. So, yeah, it's just going to be a lot of variety of topics and great episodes to come.
Yeah, man, we got a lot of great ideas for 2025, and it's a matter of figuring out how we can execute them sometimes, but we're going to do our best for y'all. So I'm really excited to get into how this set list unfolded and get some thoughts onto our submissions. But last bit of housekeeping, the incredible amount of news and notes this week we have for our first segment, Hot Tea. So some light news. Just got a new album announcement this year. Everything Must Go, coming out in April. We got our first single from it, Give It Time, 2024 fan favorite, and a track list leaked via Apple Music and then eventually on Amazon Music as well. And some of the song lengths, which are unconfirmed, but they were leaked on Amazon Music at the time, were also dropped. So the full track list as we know it is the album starts with Everything Must Go, then Give It Time, the single, Dustin Hoffman, awesome name, Your Direction, an old Visudo song that's resurfacing, Thatch, Lead Up, Animal, Red Bird, Atlas Dogs, California Magic, Feel It Now, Iguana Song, a new one, Silver Rising, and then How It Ends. So let's just slow it down a little bit because there's a lot more news to get into. But what do you think about this album drop announcement and the track list, and any just high level thoughts on this, Mike?
Yeah, obviously, like one of the biggest weeks to be a Goose fan in recent memory. It's almost like an all-out assault on my senses at this point. But the "Give It Time" single sounds absolutely amazing. I love the mixing on it, and just continuing that great tradition of working with James D. Goodwin. Obviously, we talked about Dripfield in depth recently. You can definitely still hear all that mature polish and sheen on this new single. It sounds absolutely amazing. The music video that accompanied it was also really, really outstanding. Goose doesn't miss on music videos. And I think most of us had an emotional response to it as well. So very happy where Give It Time's at, and also very intrigued by this album. Obviously, a big track list. I think it's going to probably be like 3 vinyls that this album takes up. So, and the song lengths are a little bit longer than we've seen from them in studio cuts in the past. So I think based on one of the interviews, they were trying to pay a little bit more homage to what they do in a live setting. So just so freaking excited with all this news, and can't wait to get a chance to listen to this album and hopefully review it.
Oh, cannot wait for that review. And this is a full, almost 90-minute album from the looks of it. So, really exciting time to be a Goose fan. And we'll highlight that article a little bit more in a few bullet points here, but super exciting to be a Goose fan. And it really sounds like they're really trying a different angle this time with this album. But that's just the first bit of news. Along with the album announcement, we also got a summer tour announcement with dates through the end of June here. Some quick highlights here is there's a few new dates we didn't know about that have popped up. A couple of 2-night stands here. So we're going to go back to the factory in St. Louis, Missouri for 2 nights on June 10th and 11th here. And then looks like, based off of this announcement, we hadn't had it confirmed yet, and it's still not confirmed. They're kind of cagey when you message them, but All Good Now Festival, it looks like they're going to be headlining both dates based off of the tour announcement, June 14th and 15th. Going to be an awesome time if that's the case. I think it is, but we'll see once they release the full schedule. And then another 2-night stand in Cleveland, Ohio, baby. They love Ohio. And we're going to get 2 nights at the Jacobs Pavilion in Cleveland on the 19th and 20th of June. And then lastly, just real quick, looking through this, the Goose announced they'd be headlining Mountain Jam in High Mount, New York. They're going to be headlining the Sunday date of that festival on June 22nd. And there's a lot of great artists there. J-Rad, Khruangbin, Maljoy, Karina Reichman, Dogs in a Pile. So looks like a great lineup. It makes me a little bit jealous after picking to go to All Good Now, but I'm also not jealous because we're hopefully getting 2 nights. But incredible lineup if you can make it there. So any other dates you wanted to shout out here real quick, Mike? I'm talking a lot.
Oh no, you're good. I do agree. I think All Good is Goose both nights. That's my understanding of it, and that's why I'm booking that. So I'm also very excited that they're doing 2 nights in Ohio. So I'm planning on attending that. And then the factory coming back as well. I mean, you and I lost track in 2024, texting back and forth about one of us or both of us said, there's so much good stuff in these factory shows. And because they were the first shows, they tend to get overlooked in 2024. So really glad that they're making an appearance back at both those venues. And this tour is kind of rounded out really nicely. It's a good mix of festivals and, standard shed shows.
Yeah, for sure. And if they're missing your city here, I'm sure that they're going to add more dates throughout the year. It doesn't seem like this is the end for sure. And notable that, obviously culminating the tour with the 2 of the biggest venues of this tour with Madison Square Garden in New York City, and then back to the Westville Music Bowl in New Haven, Connecticut. So both going to be an incredible way to close out this June tour, and we'll see where that propels them further on in the year.
And they just dropped even more tickets for MSG, the show that everyone says that they can't sell out. They just keep adding more and more tickets because they can't sell it out. So take that in your pipe and smoke it.
Yeah, they keep adding more seats that are a little bit further and further kind of behind the stage. I personally love that view,
Same.
having been at MSG a little bit, but yeah, I think that it's an incredible accomplishment that they've managed to sell this many tickets to their first Madison Square Garden show.
Definitely.
But lastly here, there's been a lot of new press, obviously, with the new album announcement and the new single. some great articles and great reads. They all have slightly different angles talking about the album and Give It Time, whether it's Rolling Stone or Relics or Consequence of Sound. Just a lot to read this week. But I wanted to highlight one article here from Uprocks that's titled Goose Discussed Their Sprawling New Album and Selling Out Madison Square Garden, written by Stephen Hayden over there at Uprocks. And there's a lot of really interesting tidbits in this article. It's a sit down interview with Rick and Peter, kind of talking about the new album, talking about some changes in the band in 2024, obviously with adding Cotter and Ben's departure, talking about the band's relationship with other bands like King Giz. Just a really great read. I really don't want to highlight too much of it because it's really worth sitting down and reading, but we will link that in our show doc. But anything from the article real quick you wanted to highlight, Mike, because it was fantastic. I had to read it 3 times.
I read it a couple times as well, and I'll stick to your thought here about not spoiling too much for the listeners. There's a really good quote from Peter, though, in there that you'll know it when you read it, just about where the band is heading and what they're focused on, which I thought was just really cool and shows you how down to earth this band is. And I'm obviously also a very big fan of King Giz, so to hear that they are all friends is fantastic in my world. So that made me very happy. But yeah, an amazing article, great highlight of my week for sure.
Yeah, absolutely terrific. And I guess I will highlight real quick since we kind of hinted at it with the song lengths for the new album, Everything Must Go. Both of the guys really talked about how they decided to go in a different direction with this album versus Dripfield, where they're going to pay more homage to the live versions of the songs and kind of lean into that versus trying to differentiate the studio and live cuts. So I'm really interested to see how that goes with this album. Probably more on the shenanigans side of kind of leaning into the jams.
Definitely agree. I think, we talked about it a little bit. Dripfield was kind of subverting expectations for the band, but this, it sounds like they're going to be a little bit more true to themselves. So cannot wait to hear how these are arranged, and specifically that studio thatch. I cannot wait to get my hands on that and see how that sounds.
Yeah, just some great song selections, a lot of road testing in the jam band mold here where you get a ton of plays in the live setting and never know how it's going to come out in the studio. But I'm really excited because Goose is doing it better than anyone right now.
Agreed.
So with all that, that's a lot of news to talk about. We're usually not 13 minutes into an episode or whatever we're at now at this point of the news. But let's get into the flow down here and talk the 2024 Dream set list.
Let's do it.
The 2024 Dream set list, I wanted to start by kind of running through the general methodology of how the set list came together, how songs were decided on. It wasn't a perfect science by any means. There was a lot of ties to break. We were really surprised by how many submissions we got. We got 77 total submissions, including the two of us. So really 75 of you answered, which is way more than we expected. We went into this thinking we'll get 20 submissions and call it a day. And within the first day, we had almost 50 and just continued to have them trickle in with our reminders. So thank you so much if you participated. But also, y'all made it really difficult because there were so many ties and so many unique picks. Anyway, got anything to say on that, Mike?
No, yeah, just thank you. We were blown away by the responses. It's amazing for a podcast to not even be out a year and get that much audience engagement. We love all of you, and thank you so much for that. But yes, to his point as well, we had actually more out of 13 songs. We had more ties than we did outright winners. So this was definitely a challenge, and can't wait to break down how we made these decisions and kind of what y'all voted for and what was preferred.
Yeah. So with that, let's get into that a little bit. So we wound up picking this set list based off of how many times a song was picked in a particular slot. So let's say you had a song that was picked 10 times in slot 1 and that was the most picks. That's how we picked that song. If there was a song that won multiple slots, we wound up leaning towards the slot where that song had the most total votes. And we balanced that out where there were other outright winners. So there was a lot of ties, like we said. So it wasn't an exact science, but we wound up going, if this song had 10 votes and won slot 1 and had 8 votes and won slot 2, we went with putting it in slot 1. If there was a tie for songs that won a particular slot, so let's say there's one event, and we'll get into that during the set, where 4 or 5 songs tied to win a slot, We did a judgment call tiebreaker on that. Not perfectly scientific, like I said, but we wanted to look at where songs got the most total votes overall, but also emphasize the slotting aspect, which we thought was the most important part of the set list. So emphasize where the song was picked the most directly before and after that slot in that set. So anything I missed there, Mike?
No, and I think honestly for the listeners at home, this will probably make more sense as we get into the set and can give you like some real life examples. There were a couple places I think where like a song won and then it won another slot later on, but because it was already put in that slot, it obviously was disqualified from where it pops up later. But again, I think like as we get in this, I'll make certain call outs as to what the voting looked like on each slot. And I think as we go through it, it'll just kind of come together and you'll see how it all worked out.
Either way, it's a fantastic set of songs and surprised me a little bit in certain ways. So, with that, let's get into it. So, set one, song one, opener for the show of 2024 is Hot Love and the Lazy Poet, baby. New debut from the Cap on the 7th of April of 2024. And we got 7 total votes. So that shows you how close some of these votes were, where the winner of this slot only had 7 votes. And it was picked by, I want to shout out some of our listeners here, Matt Wright, Dry Study 4009, Jake Landine, Sir Robert Donald IV, BJL 2416, Jason, and Zach M. So shout out to you. You picked this right. Set one, slot one. Any thoughts on the winner here? We went with the first debut of the song here, just based off of user submissions and what people advocated for.
Yeah, so it was interesting. Hot Love, obviously, it didn't get a lot of votes overall in our set list, but it was very, very popular for the opener. So that was one thing I found interesting about this whole process is there were other songs that popped up like in lots of different slots and just were very popular overall vote getters. Hot Love seemed to be more of like a situational pick. People really like it as a set one opener, but not in a whole lot of other slots. So I thought that was very interesting. And then just so like you know a little bit more about like how we picked the version, you had the option at the end of the submission to advocate for specific versions that you had included in your set. And Hot Love got the most submissions for the Cap version, which I think a lot of that had to do with that was the first time Goose played it. So everyone was very excited about it. But yeah, this worked out really great. The only thing that was even relatively close was All I Need was 6 votes, which is also a very good opener. So I wouldn't have been displeased with that. But this one was pretty straightforward as Hot Love was the clear runaway winner.
Yeah. And this song is such a great way to capture some of like the story time style writing between Matt Campbell and Rick. And it's just a great hook and just a nice burst of energy, kind of shorter song, but just gets the room moving immediately. So it's really cemented itself as a fan favorite, I think, really quickly, and just a great way to open a show. You can't go wrong with a Hot Love opener. And you really kind of mentioned it with All I Need being the next closest vote getter, which we'll get into that in just a second. But we also wanted to shout out that there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 songs that had 4 votes each. I won't list them all out because some of them make the set later, but just a couple that didn't make the set. Just spoiler alert: Turbulence, Lead the Way, and Flow Down all had 4 votes here as well. So some really chalk but popular openers, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the other cool thing about Hot Love is you get to start off with a Cotter drum solo usually. So it's just got a lot of energy, like you said, to kick off a show.
Yeah. So anything else on Hot Love before we move into our song number 2 from set one?
No, not much. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward opener, but we all love it as an opener and sets a good tone for the show, especially from the Cap, because everything from the Cap is outstanding.
And I probably should have said this from the top, but we'll have a link to this set list, the Dream set list of 2024, in the show notes here. So we'll post that up. And if you want to listen along while we're talking, that'd be so much fun. But next up, and to no surprise, All I Need, which was the second highest vote getter of slot one, wound up winning slot 2 here for set one. So this got 5 total votes here, picked by Stanky Steve, John Nalbone, Matt Wright, Orseno, and Dupar Golf. Any thoughts on All I Need in this slot? And then we'll get into the version we picked.
Yeah, so I really like All I Need towards the beginning of the show. This kind of continues a trend where I'm seeing certain songs, they're like either popular in one area and then they're not showing up elsewhere in the show. I think a similar thing kind of ends up happening with Madhavan, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But it was interesting how much people preferred All I Need to be heavy towards the beginning. And this one was notable as well because it actually was in a tie with Turn Clouds, which obviously we both love that song as well. And we kind of just had to make an executive decision here. And I think honestly, All I Need is such a more overall classic for the Goose catalog, and I would say generally considered to be a heavy hitter. And it's not that I don't love Turn Clouds. I would take it at any show for sure, but it's usually a pretty static 10 or 12-minute version. So I think for us, it was easier to lean towards All I Need, making this set better than Turn Clouds, where I feel like we're just kind of static at that point.
Yeah, and also worth noting, like we talked about with the methodology, is All I Need got more total votes in the polling than Turn Clouds overall, where Turn Clouds was very popular in this slot. We wanted to just highlight All I Need because way more people voted for it to be in a set list. So we wound up going with the most advocated for version, which was from the factory at St. Louis. We highlighted that just a second ago in our notes for the week. But from 6/4 2024, June 4th, baby. Great show. And this is a sneaky fun All I Need, I would say. I hadn't listened back to it in a while just because it hadn't gotten a lot of buzz after the fact, but really cool back and forth, sandwichy, segue driven intro between All I Need and Time to Flee here. And it's really worth noting because you feel like they played everything at that cap run, but this was the first time Cotter played All I Need, which, it's insane monster way to start off a summer tour here. Just a great jam vehicle. And while it's a fairly straightforward version of All I Need, I'd say, compared to some of the ones that get a little weird from back in the day, it's just such a driving, triumphant jam. And Cotter's work on the toms is just incredible on this. Just, again, early on, highlighting how he can somehow add melody and emotion just via the way he plays the toms better than almost anyone else.
I 1000% agree with that. The toms are like so crucial to what makes Cotter so amazing. And whenever he gets into those like staggered jaunts on the drums where it's, you're kind of spinning out of control, I feel like jams just go to another level at that point. This one is a little bit straightforward. I feel like the first like half of the jam is kind of like all trending towards like a Thatch vibe, or, that kind of jam vehicle, similar, but just a little bit more like proggy than Thatch jams tend to get. And then they like kind of take like a little bit of a 2-minute cool down and then ramp it back up to all energy again for the end. I definitely slept on this one. I know I watched the show live when it happened, but I think you just get so caught up in Jam of the Year and buzz, like you said, you start focusing on a lot of the other more monstrous jams from the year. And I don't think All I Need had like a particularly noteworthy 2024, but spending the last week with this version, I think this probably has the best case to be the best All I Need from 2024. It's pretty solid.
Yeah, just really fun. And that segue back and forth between this and Flea is just some of the most outstanding transitioning they did all year. You definitely know they had that in mind with this set for sure, but it's really fun to see how they got there in retrospect. So, real quick, we talked about Turn Clouds just losing the tiebreaker here. A couple of other songs that didn't quite make the cut were Earthling Alien with 4 votes, So Ready, Doc Brown, and Feel It Now with 3 votes each. And then our next set list song, song 3 of set 1, Born, also had 3 votes here. So let's get into that. We wound up going with Born as the third song of our Dream set list of 2024. Had 6 votes by Orseno, Mary Grace, John DeAngelis 7, PA Rock, Topher B, and MLB Respecter. And this is another one got advocated for. So shout out to St. Louis. You have a lot of fans from that area. The 6/4 version from the factory, same show, same set as the All I Need, was picked for the Dream set list here. Any thoughts on the winner? Any thoughts on Born here? Just get some high level thoughts before we get into the song itself.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, I think the set's flowing pretty well. I mean, I like the energy of Hot Love, going into more sustained energy from All I Need, and then a little bit more into the emotional space with this Born, at least until the jam takes off. Obviously, this is one of the longer jams from 2024, so there are a lot of different musical pieces here. But the first half of it is kind of like chill psych vibes, 2001 space, as you frequently hear Born go to, and but it does take off at the end. But I just think as far as balancing out the set list, Born works pretty magically right here.
Yeah, it does. It's really a great song for a set one, I think. I think it works much better in this spot than in set two, just because of the way the jam can be more chill and can be more of a roller coaster ride. And Goose tends to want to end their shows on a higher energy note, I feel like. So just a great spot for it. Early Born, I'd take that every show. And this is definitely the best Born of the year as far as I'm concerned from St. Louis. You immediately go into that 2001 jam, and I think Peter just steals the show the entire way. As far as I'm concerned, his work on the synth is just outstanding, and it elevates and elevates as the jam goes on. You get the full spectrum of it. You get some relaxing vintage vibe. You get some amorphous swelling kind of synthy stuff from the OB6. You get a little clav thrown in there. So I just think it's great. And then when you think it's over, about 18, 19, 20 minutes in, Trevor takes over with this bubbling bass, and you pivot into like this like jubilant, jolly outro that ends in the most like unexpected classic rock style run that you'll hear Goose do. So just a roller coaster ride and really fun. And the 30 minutes are over before you know it.
Yeah, definitely the best Born of 2024. And honestly, the only thing that came close in this slot was Creatures, which I'm definitely glad that Born won here. I do not like what Creatures would have done to our flow here if that would have been the winner.
I'm always here for Creatures, but I definitely think it fits better later in a set, which we might get into later. We'll see. But I also want to shout out California Magic got a lot of love early in the set. In slot 1, 2, and 3, it got a bunch of votes. We didn't shout that out yet. But it was 4 votes here for slot 3, and then A Western Sun and Earthling or Alien got 3 votes each here. So shout those out. Some of them might have made it, some of them might not have made it. We'll see as we get on in the set. But getting into song 4 from set 1, we got a monster song from 2024. And this was a really, really tough one to pick, actually, because Tumble wound up winning in slot 4, but was in a 6-way tie with 3 total votes for Tumble. And we wound up picking this because it had the most total votes in the poll out of everything. It was just split up over slots like so evenly if you look at the data. So we had to throw Tumble in there because it got a lot of love in our poll. And the 3 folks who voted for it in this specific slot were Seamus G, Jay Worthy, and JC333. So real quick, Tumble, let's get into it. Any thoughts? It had to be in the set, right?
Well, yeah, especially when you consider that the Jam of the Year bracket, that was the most voted on jam from last year. It was kind of just pretty easy to rationalize. We're going to see the Tumble Philly somewhere in this set, and everyone did not let us down. It was definitely the most voted, definitely the most requested version. And so, I think we could have had this Philly Tumble at the end of set 2. It could have been in, where it ended up in set 1. I think this jam is so good, and everyone is just so instantly in love with it that I think it could have worked anywhere in the set, but it definitely worked really well here. And kind of going back to back with monster jams from, the best Born of 2024 to what is widely considered, the best Tumble and maybe the best jam for a lot of people of 2024.
Correction, it is the best jam of 2024. I don't care what anyone says.
Fair enough.
No, yeah, we picked the Philly version. It was definitely by far the most advocated for individual version of a song that we got from people who chose to submit individual versions. And Tumble had an incredible 2024. It was the song of the year, I think. It had so many great versions, but you have to go with the Philadelphia Tumble as the crown jewel of 2024 Tumbles. And just gotta love what they've done with the song. This is just an incredible roller coaster ride of glee and bliss. And the jam starts off without a hitch. Get some great Trevor, you get some funk, you get a dance party, and then we slow down and go into some blissy, lighter, emotional, uplifting space, and then back to melt your face rock to close the thing out. We've gone over this in detail over several episodes, so I won't bore you with my same old thoughts over and over again, folks, but this has got to be one of the top jams of the year, if not the jam of the year.
Yeah, definitely said. I mean, you said it perfectly. Emotional bliss is kind of the name of the game with this one because I think a lot of us would consider it, one of the most emotional guitar solos Rick's ever played. I mean, it pierces your spiritual soul. So I just I can't imagine this song not being in the set list. But as I've looked at the set list over the last week or so and just spent more time kind of digesting how everything has fallen, I think it really wound up in the perfect spot for it and gives us a lot of punch going towards the back half of our set one.
Yeah, definitely. And the way that this Philly tumble ends, it's just like a burst of energy at warp speed. I think on the first episode we talked about it, I was like, the band went full plaid. Shout out to Spaceballs. Going into song 5, anything you want to say before we get into our next song here, Mike?
Well, I'll just set it up. By far the hardest part of the set list to navigate for me. I don't know if it was for you as well, Alex, but this was song 5 was tough.
Yeah, so we're at warp speed to end this Philly tumble, and we get a surprise here. By far the most or the least voted for song of our set list overall, but it just dominated this slot. So we got Everything Must Go in song 5 of set 1. Great song. And we say the by far the least voted. It was still like a top 25 most voted song. So we went pretty true to people's votes over here. But we got the Everything Must Go from the Cap, which was the most advocated for version of EMG for the year, which surprised me a little bit. I don't know about you, Mike. But it was another tight race for this spot, a 4-way tie, and none of the other songs made the set list, unfortunately. It just didn't get enough votes. EMG was by far the most voted for out of these. So we also got Doc Brown, Jive 1, and Jive 2 that were most voted for here, and they just didn't quite have enough votes to get in there, which hurts me a little bit. I wish we could just include every song, honestly. So, yeah, any thoughts on this EMG from the Cap here, Mike? Any thoughts on EMG in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I've told you this. I think EMG kind of had a down year in 2024. Obviously, the Soulshine version is standout. I think I still had that kind of middle of the pack, though. Everwise wasn't bad either, but it had been a little while since I listened to the Cap version. This is a very solid version. I think I'd probably put it at 3, but behind Soulshine and Everwise, but still a very solid version. I think the struggle part of the set list for me here is that Jive 1 and Jive 2 tied in this slot, and it would have been so nice if there was somewhere else in the set list where Jive 1 and Jive 2 were leading vote getters consecutively. Obviously, that would have worked out perfectly, but it broke my heart a little bit to see them both getting their most votes and not enough to get into the set in this 5 slot. So that part stunk a little bit. But the other thing I'll note here is that for me, I love EMG, and I'm very excited to hear the studio version of it. All the superlatives, it deserves it. But I will say that I think going Born, Philly Tumble, EMG in a row is a little bit emotional heavy for me as far as terms of the flow of the set list. I could have seen these 3 songs broken up and probably been a little bit better with it, but I think when you see what song 6 ends up being, you'll see that ultimately set 1 does kind of balance itself out. Not to look for our head.
Yeah, totally. And EMG is always welcome in a show. I think to your point, it probably did have a little bit down of a year compared to years past, but it's still a monster jam vehicle. It just feels like every time they kind of got into a groove there, it was in a part of a set or they had so much ambition for later in the set that they had to cut it short a little bit. But this was a fun version to listen back to. I hadn't listened to it really in months. It just has kind of been ignored ever since it was played, I would say. But yeah, really just pretty straightforward but entertaining ride on this jam. Rick is kind of latching onto this classic rock riff early on, and then rickifies it, of course, with his what he tends to do with his sweeping ascendant licks up and down the fretboard. And we get into a clap dance party from there, and then the band kind of brings it down to a whisper after that peak. Peter hops on the marimba, and we end on a speed funk number to close out the preview into what EMG might look like in 2024. But it kind of gives you a little sampler platter of a lot of the sounds that the band latched onto in 2024 when I listened back in retrospect.
Yeah, and It's always cool when you go back to the cap run because that's when the marimba piano was kind of becoming more prevalent. But it is interesting to me. I've obviously focused a lot on like the best versions from the cap, but I've noticed as I go and listen to like other things like the Arcadia from the cap or this EMG from the cap, things I maybe didn't spend as much time with because they weren't necessarily Jam of the Year contenders. It is interesting how much of that 4 day cap run the marimba piano pops up as a focal point of so many sections of so many jams. And obviously they roll through some of their best jams in 2024, but it's so throughout that run there.
Yeah, it's such an incredible run when you listen back and think, how the hell did they have it this cohesive this early on in Cotter's tenure, and some really great
Yeah,
jam concepts that just reared their head throughout the year.
definitely.
So, pivoting from EMG, we get into the set closer for set one, song 6. And this one dominated this slot as well. We get Arrow from the Fox Theater in Atlanta from June 22nd with 8 total votes. And one of them was you, Mike. But we had votes from Showronda, our friend Trisha, Trish DMB 23, Orsano, Stanky Steve, Last Show, Steve Franco, and Trey Materatonda. Interesting uh, that it won so handily here. I know that it made its way as a set closer a handful of times, but I'm just kind of a little bit surprised that it dominated this slot compared to some other heavy hitters we've seen.
Yeah, I got lucky and got in tune with the people on this one. It didn't happen for me very much throughout both sets, but I was finding the voice of the people here. I just think Arrow is a really good closer for either set. It's obviously going to finish with a ton of energy and finish with a bang. I think it also worked out nicely. I'm kind of surprised that it worked out this way, but as so many of you picked out specific versions of songs at the end of these responses, and thank you so much for doing that. I was not expecting to see as many specific versions called out, but a lot of you did. But I was the only one that picked a specific version of Arrow, so we wind up with the Fox version here. And because it's arguably the greatest Dark Goose of 2024, I think this worked out kind of perfectly. Obviously, I didn't know ahead of time it would work out this way, but it kind of brings a bang to the end of set one. And after you've got kind of 3 emotionally heavy songs in a row, this is just kind of aggressive, dark energy with this jam. And I think it just, kind of ends set one with an explosion.
Yeah, it's actually a really fun listen if you're listening through the set list to see the set end this way. And like it was the set closer in Atlanta at the time, so you get to hear the crowd roar at the end too. And we've talked at length about this Arrow as well. I think going back and I tried to prioritize rewatching clips where I could as well of these songs. And this takes the cake for the best light show of the summer tour by far. This is some of Getty's best work too. So really fun to watch. And again, another roller coaster ride where you get out of that main Arrow motif and all of a sudden you're in dark ambient goose with the alien invasion we've talked about, and then go into the crazy high drive riffing of Rick that we got to see all over the Rider videos over the year, but it just always hits and blast off into space. So shout out to this Arrow. It's one of my top 10 jams for sure of 2024, but we'll see how it does when the people vote.
Yeah, I think I had it at 11. So very, very similar.
And real quick, just want to shout out that there was a handful of other songs that got a lot of votes. One that unfortunately did not make the Dream Set list, so spoiling that a little bit, is Madhuvan here with 5 votes. And Madhuvan was one of those songs where it got a ton of votes, but just never quite won a slot or even tied to win a slot throughout this entire process. So it just barely didn't make the cut. And then Tumble. People love Tumble. It won the slot earlier on in the set list, and it had 6 votes here. So again, just very, very popular year for Tumble. And then we had one last song, which was by far our most voted for song on the Dream set list, but I don't want to spoil that quite yet. But that also had 6 votes here. So that concludes our set one here, Mike. Quite a ride, a lot of heavy hitters. Just want to hear your overall thoughts on the 2024 Dream set list, set one here. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll try and break it down by section. So on the one hand, I absolutely love how many monster jams we've got here because you've got obviously a massive Born, the Philly Tumble, and the arrow from the fox. I mean, in my opinion, you're getting three of like arguably the top 25, 30 jams of 2024 in one set. So obviously a very long set, but very outstanding. Maybe a little bit unrealistic set for real life, but that's why this is a dream set. I kind of think it worked out perfectly. I Song 5 is, if I was going to change anything, song 5 is what I would change, the EMG. It's not that I'm mad about it, but I think we could have had something maybe with a little bit more up tempo energy, or maybe even aggression or intensity in that slot, and I think we would have had a little bit more slightly balanced set. But I would be, on cloud 9 if I was at this show and this was my set 1. So it worked out great. To your last point, though, definitely disappointed with what happened with Madhavan. It was so interesting how it was extremely popular in 2 slots and just not enough in either slot to get it over the top. That definitely sucks, but great set.
Yeah, it really is a shame. It really is a shame when you think about it. It just such a great song, had a great year, but just didn't quite make the cut of winning any particular slot because people just like it everywhere in a set list.
True, and you also saw one thing I learned. I feel like from this exercise is that I definitely learned people have higher preference for where certain songs go than I would have necessarily imagined. A song as popular as like Madhavan, for example, I would have expected to see on all 13 slots, but you really saw it more concentrated in certain areas. And I think the same was true for Hunger Site as well. People want certain songs in certain slots, and that may be something we need to look at our process for next year as far as trying to give songs more of a chance that people may only want, in a handful of places.
Yeah, it's gonna be a interesting exercise to consistently refine and tweak this methodology, and it was fun this first year, but man, there was a lot of ties. So hopefully that gets resolved with greater submissions and more participation. But it's pretty crazy looking at the overall graphs of like so many different songs would be picked with 1 vote or 2 votes, and then a handful would get, 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 votes in a song slot if you're lucky.
So, what were your overall thoughts on set 1?
I was gonna say, I think you really hit the nail on the head with your overall thoughts, but I wanted to shout out, I thought it was really interesting that in this set 1, it was all songs from early on in the year that were advocated for. So we went from the cap through the June tour here for all the songs, getting an early preview of what Goose would look like with Cotter, and with the way the set flows, and we'll get into it at the end, it's really interesting that it wasn't quite chronological order. Obviously, you're going back and forth a little bit, but the set kind of goes in chronological order of the growth of Goose as the year went on, and people just really appreciated, the different versions from the different points in the year, and they kind of want their set list to go with that growth of Goose.
Yeah, it's a great call out. It's pretty actually incredible that it worked out that way, because obviously this is all totally random. So to get all early 2024 cuts in set 1, and then also, I mean, we were equally shocked that we had 2 selections make it from the same freaking show in set 1. Like, we worked pretty hard to give you all the chance to pick every single song they played in 2024. So it's a little bit insane to me that we got 2 St. Louis songs in set 1, even though I think it worked out great and maybe even helped our flow.
And 2 songs from the first night of the cap.
That surprises me a little bit less, just because, yeah, Cap is god tier, but it seems more random to get it from like a random, to your point, the same set of a summer show. Um, just insanity.
Yeah, so just a really fun ride. Obviously, this would never happen in real life because
Yeah.
it's so long of a set 1, but really, really interesting to see what people prioritize and where they like songs in certain slots. So I thought if I ever got this at a show, it'd be like the most monster show of all time.
Yeah, and we've both been listening to the set list that you'll be able to hear as well. And I've been listening to it for 2 or 3 days now, and it plays back really, really well. So I think if you get a chance to get in there and take a listen to this set as it plays out, you'll be pretty impressed with it, because it does actually end up working out really well.
Totally. And going into set 2, which I also found to be a very, very fun ride, we start off with a banger here, and people loved this song in this slot. So the set 2 opener wound up being Hunger Site, of course. Biggest crowd roar you'll hear at any given show. And the most advocated for version was from Goosemas, of course. the 13th of December in North Charleston, South Carolina. It was voted for by 8 people in this slot. So shout them out. Harry, Kevin Donovan, John DeAngelis 7, Jordan, your heady pal, Sir Robert Donald IV again. This guy is all over these picks, in touch with the people. SRP 4 and MLB Respecter again, also in touch with the people. So any thoughts on the winner here, Mike? Obviously, this jam has just been shooting up people's Jam of the Year charts.
Yeah, so I had this hunger site, I think at 4 or 5. It's just it's been unbelievable to hear how hunger site has evolved throughout 2024. We've heard hunger site seemingly go through different phases based on the points of the year, but this hunger site for me from Goosemas takes the cake. It was the highlight of Goosemas weekend for me. I'll just briefly cover when Pete kind of locks into this 3-chord progression, they kind of stay there for the majority of it. And it's just one of those great slow build jams that Goose keeps getting better of and doing more of recently. And it just every minute more elements come into it. And it comes up to one of the most powerful and blissy peaks I've ever heard in my entire life. Absolutely outstanding version. Hunger Site is probably the best way to kick off set 2. Other than, I do have to shout this out, just behind the 8 votes the Hunger Site got was Madhavan with 7. And I was in a group of 7 people that wanted Madhavan here. And it's so hard to argue that it would be better, because I think both have an argument to be the best set 2 openers. They're just both such great songs, and great specifically in that slot, that it's really hard to be bitter about it, because this is, one of my favorite jams of 2024, but at the same time, very, very bittersweet that we don't get to have one of the great versions of Madhavan here either.
Yeah, just a brutal cut. To see it lose by 1 vote or 2 votes or whatever it was in a handful of slots was just heartbreaking, because Madhavan had an incredible year.
Yes, definitely.
But I'll say I don't think any of the Madhuvans hit the full band jam in the way that this Hunger Site did. They were excellent in very different ways, and this was like more of a masterclass in just a full band slow crescendo. And it was something that we could not have seen at any other point in Goose's history until they've gotten to this point they're at now. You can really hear how dialed in and like kind of how amorphously back and forth folks can trade off melody or being the spotlight or the anchor of a jam. And got to really shout out that this jam is going to be looked upon very fondly, I think, when it comes to not just Jam of the Year voting, but kind of pivot points in where this band has really taken off through the stratosphere in their musicality.
Yeah, this is kind of like what I'd like to see a lot more from Goose going forward. I hope we get lots more jams like this, because it's one of those ones where it definitely improves every time you listen to it, because you're able to pick out more and more of the intricacies at play here, and how all these little subtle shifts by Peter from, clav to organ, he just goes through kind of the gamut of what the song and the jam needs. And, around like the 15 or 16 minute mark, when Rick finally kicks on his distortion, it's absolutely incredible to me that at the same time that you can still kind of hear that original 3-chord progression in the background, the jam's kind of also left it behind, because it doesn't need it anymore to function on its own. And you're just left to take in the glory of, how the hell did we even get here in 10 minutes? This was just a slow build, and yet you arrive at this peak that is so just monstrous, it doesn't make sense. So absolutely love how this worked out, and I'm still going to cry some tears that Madhavan didn't make it here. So it's just it's great and bad all at once.
Yeah, and shouting out Madhavan, it was by far the most voted for song overall that didn't quite make the set list. And we really wanted to prioritize slotting, like we said here, but that just felt wrong when we reflected back on the set list.
So wrong. And at the end, I'll cover like what I think are the biggest omissions and the songs that got close but just couldn't find a slot to win in. But this one was the one that broke my heart the most, for sure.
Yep. And getting into song 2 of set 2, we're just going to keep the energy ramped up here. Lots of great hunger sites that ended with raging, explosive finishes. And we get into another banger here. We get the Creatures from the next day at Goosemas on the 14th of December in North Charleston, South Carolina. Had 7 total votes here in this slot by Showronda, Jordan, Your Heady Pal, PA Rock, Milo Believe, Lasho, and JC333. This is an underappreciated version of Creatures, I would say, by some folks. It's got a really interesting intro jam, and then the outro jam is an all-out dance party that really gets into some cool ideas that I wish were drawn out even longer towards the end, but they had to get to more balls being drawn at bingo. Really, really fun overall. Creatures is always welcome in a set, but I think this is a really perfect slot for it at the end of the day. What are your thoughts, Mike?
So I'm okay with it here. I think this, if I'd known in advance that this was the version of Creatures that was going to win, I think it probably works better at the back end of a set, similar how it fell at Goosemas. I think that's kind of probably more appropriate. You said earlier, Goose does tend to try and finish with more energy, so I think getting a dance party, 2 or 3 songs from the end or even at the end is probably more appropriate. But this is a really, really good version of Creatures. Love the arpeggiator stuff that Peter's doing. And something that you've seen a little bit more from Rick in 2024 is that as Peter's been able to incorporate more like electronic elements to the jams, Rick has taken a lot more opportunities to just do like some light vamping during those parts where before I felt like Rick was more often than not in a lead playing role. And I feel like more so in 2024, he's been able to take a step back and just accompany the jam, with some light improv, some light vamping, and it's just made whatever Peter's doing with the complex array of electronics going on hit even harder. And I just think that's a new element of goose jamming that I'm totally here for.
Yeah, and you saw a little bit of a unique side of that with this Creatures with Peter, who normally starts off on the guitar and then heads over to the keys in the jam, switches back to the guitar, which is pretty rare in this day and age. I don't think I had seen it much in 2024 at all. I got to look back at that in more detail. But ripping riff to end this 2 guitar goose is amazing. And I got to disagree with you on I love it at the end of the set too, but I think that after set break, people need a kick in the pants a little bit. Wake up, people. You've been chilling too long here with no music. Let's get it ramped up again. And I think keeping a high energy set too is really the way to go. We're all getting old here. It's a little bit of an older fan base. Let's bring in the youngsters to kind of balance us out, but we all need to wake up, after 9 p.m. past our bedtime.
well, that's certainly fair. And so, yeah, no, I don't have anything to say to that. I'm fine with the energy being up here. I just think the ones that are like falling more lately into like the specifically dancey territory, like Creatures, Sinnerman, stuff like that, I feel like I probably like them a little bit more towards the end, just when we're just talking about the electronic aspects of Goose, not necessarily up tempo or anything. I think I've seen a lot of the dance parties at the end, and I think that's kind of where I'd like them. But going from that amazing hunger site at Goosemas to the Creatures is it's going to work out pretty great.
And totally. And we get an interesting transition here from Creatures into what was our second most voted for song in slot 2 of set 2, but wound up winning slot 3 here. And by far the most voted for song in this entire exercise. Big Modern, baby, making its debut at Holmdel, New Jersey at the PNC Bank Arena. And that was the most advocated for version, which totally shocked me. I don't think it's the best version, but I understand why it was picked here because it's such a monumental point in the band's history. So wound up only getting 4 votes in this slot. It had more votes in other slots, but this was the only slot where it outright won. So we thought to insert it here. And it was picked by Greg Massa, Hawkward 90, Jive 1, and Garrett Garn TD. So thoughts here on Big Modern, thoughts on it being the September 1st version, the debut?
Yeah, so I love Big Modern here. I love Big Modern anywhere. I'm so proud of all of us to make this the most vote winning song. I think that speaks very well of us and our listeners. So great job, everyone. That definitely deserves it. I also voted for the Homedale version, so I probably differ from you a little bit there. I do think it's the best version of Big Modern, and I like both
Wow.
sides of it. We talked about the hunger site from Goosemas. I like that kind of jam perfectly well. I think that the long extended, just gradually elevating the sound is a great approach. But I also like these, like I call them like schizophrenic jams, where they almost just seem like a squirrel, where they just keep bouncing from idea to idea to idea and just keep trying things. And it's a lot of shorter sections, But I think that these kind of journeys can be just as fun as the long, patient builds because you're getting, Baskin Robbins level of flavors. So I think it works great here. And you'll see set two compared to set one. Not that set one wasn't big, obviously it was. This set two is just absolutely nothing but monsters.
So I really kind of loved Big Modern being selected from Holmdel here. It was such a monumental point in the band's 2024 history here, where people were all losing their minds at this amazing new song. No one knew if it was a new cover that was like some obscure song or a Goose original. I think people wound up landing on that pretty quickly that it was an original, but people were scrambling on El Goose. There was posts all over X at the time. Not everyone was using Blue Sky at that point, and people were just losing their shit over like, what the hell is this amazing song? And to have the longest jam of the year represented in this 2024 Dream Set list, I think is important, whether or not it was arguably the best version. I know you love it, Mike, and I have a lot of respect for it, just in the sense that while it might not have the most fleshed out ideas, it wound up having a lot of really cool concepts thrown in, and it explored a lot of territory that wound up being more fleshed out in later jams throughout the year, which I kind of found exciting, deep diving into it a little bit more this week and being like, oh yeah, I heard this kind of jam later on in the year. This was at Goose Miss. This was at Cincy, and it was way more fleshed out. So really cool that they were exploring all of that in Big Modern.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that they got a lot better at that in 2024, where little pieces of ideas would come up in certain jams, and then you would see that reappear like a month later in a completely different song. So, yeah, I think of like that Into the Mist from Nashville. You saw that theme of chords pop back up in the Madhavan in Pittsburgh. So, love that point that you made. That's very, very true. And just, continuing to be indicative of the amount of massive growth that they've found for improv since Cotter joined the band. It's just been massive.
Yeah, and they do love to take a debut of a song and just jam the hell out of it. And this was the most monstrous example of that with 36 minutes and 41 seconds of magic. Just incredible stuff. And to open a set two with something like that is just so bold. Just a really exciting time to be a Goose fan, whether you're watching or you're in attendance. Monumental, monumental song.
Forever jealous of your experience at Homedale last year, buddy. That was a massive, awesome show to go to.
I feel that way, but if you ask my stepdaughter or even my wife, they're like, "That's too long. Like, we don't need that long." And I'm like, "Give me more."
Clearly, I should have gone to Homedale with you because I would have been so freaking happy.
Yeah, no, like it was great, but I can appreciate the other side of it too, where it's like, well, we're going with the 20-minute jams.
It was
This
a
is a little
lot,
too
yeah.
long for a song we don't know yet. But I loved it. I loved every second of it. It explored all kinds of genre in that jam, like you said. And while it might not be as fleshed out as some of the more compact versions, a lot of fun to listen back to. Really quick, want to shout out Into the Mist is a song that was really heavily voted for. Not quite on the Madhuvan level, but it had 4 votes here in this slot as well. And just missed out on the set list by not having quite enough votes or winning an outright slot in a place where a song like Big Modern wasn't, that had so many more votes than it. So RIP to Into the Mist. Wish it made it. Had a great year, but didn't quite make the cut for the Dream set list.
Yeah, definitely. And you saw, like, from our listeners, there were so many people that wanted the Miss from the Cap, and we know how beloved that jam is. It's obviously one of the most special moments of 2024. But again, I think this is kind of the interesting part of us making a dream set list, is that slotting really does matter. And unfortunately for Into the Mist, the people didn't have like a strong consensus of where they overwhelmingly wanted Into the Mist. And I think that we kind of learned from this experience, I definitely did at least, that even if a song is very popular, if a large amount of the people don't want that song in a specific slot, it can be difficult for it to win, and it can be an uphill battle to get it into the set. And I think Into the Mist is one of those songs that, unfortunately, in this case, the fact that it works anywhere in a set kind of is a disadvantage, because it just meant that there wasn't like that overwhelming slot preference where it had a chance to break in. So that part sucks, but
Yeah, it's really the same problem Madhuvan had on a smaller scale. It's just too great of a song that could fit anywhere in a set. And that just is more motivation to get the troops out to vote hard for Into the Mist in 2025, baby. Let's go.
there you go.
But next up, we got a song that's super popular, like one of our top vote getters here. And it won a few slots, but this was the slot where it had the biggest win, and that would be Dripfield. And no surprise here, most advocated version was from the 10-year anniversary of Goose forming at the Greek Theater in Los Angeles, California on September 27th. Had 5 votes in this slot, and during this part of the set list, 5 votes doesn't sound like a lot, but there was like 90 songs that would get 1 vote. Like, crazy. We didn't have 90 submissions, but it was like the entire list was like 1 vote and then 2 votes, 3 votes, 4 votes. And this one having 5 votes was a big deal at this part of the set. So, shout out to Greg Massa, Hawkward90, you, Mike, again, in touch with the people. Unlike me, I didn't get a single one right. Brian, Brypen, and Ben Chasing Satellites. So, thoughts on this Dripfield? Obviously, this was almost your jam of the year at one point. Great version, considered the GOAT by many, including us, I would say. So, let's get into it.
Yeah, it's definitely my GOAT Dripfield. It was on the perch of number 1 for a little while. I think it ended up finishing at 5, right behind the Goose Miss Hunger site for me. I think this Dripfield is definitely the GOAT version. I've heard some people say that the beginning section is just like an extension of Dripfield. I think it changes kind of dramatically from 13, 14 minutes on and moves into a lot of interesting territory for Dripfield. I think Dripfield for me is probably like right up there with Hunger Site as far as like the most iconic experience I think you can have at a Goose show. So much so that when I was at Goosemas and my dad was at his second Goose show ever, when they pulled the Dripfield as a bonus ball in the encore, I told him, thank God, because I really don't feel like you would have had the true Goose experience without getting to hear this song live. So for me, Dripfield's very important to have in a set list, and this Greek version is the best version. So I like that we're kind of trending strong here to finish this set out.
Definitely. And Dripfield is another song that can fit anywhere in a set. I was a little surprised to see it not in like a quote unquote power slot, like an opener, closer, encore. Like I personally picked it as the encore song for my dream set list, but it fits here. I mean, it's a mid set banger. It's going to wake up the room, but also take you in these beautiful, relaxing soundscapes that you would not expect to be at sometimes with Dripfield. And this actually was an outright winner, but it tied technically with Everything Must Go, which also had the same amount of votes in this slot, which is really interesting because all things considered, Everything Must Go didn't have a lot of overall votes compared to some songs that didn't make the cut, but it just dominated the slots that it was put into. So I really wanted to shout that out. People really love a late set EMG.
Yeah, another thing to call out here, Hunger Site also had a decent amount of votes, but obviously it was already in the set. So I found that a little bit interesting as well. And this was also the only place that I saw Elmig go up in votes to a point where it was like at least close to threatening. Elmig is obviously a very dear song in the community, but it really just didn't pop up very many points in the set. But it got 4 votes here. So it was interesting that there was at least a little bit of slot preferencing when it came to Elmig, just not enough to get it over the hump. And I think it works out really well if you obviously the set is leaving reality in the dust at this point because we're going from that massive big modern to I think it's a 27-minute drip field. So this section of the show is gargantuan.
Oh, yeah. And Mist, another song just to shout out real quick, just barely missed the cut here again. Pour Into the Mist.
Or Into the Mist.
Also had 4 votes. But Elmeg and Mist both were 2 songs that had a lot of votes evenly split throughout and just didn't make the cut. But Elmeg was a little more evenly distributed where it was like just never one of the top 5 songs, but was in the top 10 of like every slot, I would say. So shout out to Elmeg. RIP, you didn't make it either. The next part of the set list is to close out set 2 is really fun. It's not something we typically see. Like I was pretty surprised to see at least this song coming in the next slot here in this part of a set. But the people wanted it, so we're gonna put it here. And what wound up being picked is A Western Sun, late set 2, song 5 from the Salt Shed in Chicago on September 12th, 2024. Holy cow. What a version. I knew that as soon as a Western Sun was picked here, this was going to be the most advocated for version. And shout out to the folks who voted for it. Seekers on the Ridge 88, Tom Perry, BLJ 2416, and Thomas Elliott. So 4 total votes here. And again, that was really hard to get votes when there was so much even distribution through these mid-set songs. Really quick before we get into A Western Sun itself with Julian Lage on it, two other songs actually tied it here, but were eliminated just because they didn't have enough total votes throughout the setlist process. So 726 and Silver Rising each had 4 votes here as well, and just barely had less votes than A Western Sun total. Interesting to see Dripfield and 726 flipped from their normal voting pattern, but that's what we saw here, where people were putting Dripfield first and then 726. But let's get back into A Western Sun. Outstanding version here that was picked, and really interesting to have it as a kind of a cool down song before we close out set 2.
Yeah, this was, I think, to me, maybe the most interesting slotting of a song of the entire set list. I mean, on the one hand, I was really hopeful that the Julian Lodge version of this song would make it. It clearly was one of the best moments of 2024. I know we both agree on that 100%. It's also interesting to note 726 would work perfectly in this slot. In fact, it often appears in this slot, so it would work really well here. And it's not that you don't want Silver Rising, which also got 4 votes here, but I do think that this works out best. I think Western Sun probably would have worked out better where it was originally played, like at the Salt Shed, but at least we get to have this experience with Julian Lage again here in the set. And I think all things considered, it can kind of fulfill a similar role that 726 would normally play. So it ends up working out great. It may not be like my number one choice for the second to last song in set 2, but considering this is the version we're getting, which is, in my opinion, the GOAT version of A Western Sun, I'm not going to complain about this at all.
No, we had to feature this version. This is easily in my top 5 most listened to songs of the year. Julian Lage is such an incredible guitarist, bringing the jazz to the indie groove band a little bit and forcing Rick to get out of his comfort zone a little bit with his riffing. Just an outstanding version. It might not be the longest jam in the world. I don't think it got enough love as a quote unquote Jody contender just because it was a different guitarist on a lot of this jam, but it is excellent. Excellent stuff here. And I think as a cool down song, it works great. Like, I'd love to see this at a show. Western Sun to kind of take you out into a banger to close out the set. I think it's just terrific. So shout out to people picking that. Really interesting slotting, like you said, Mike.
Unconventional, but I agree with you. It worked out great. So
Yeah, and with that, we're gonna close out set 2. Kind of chalk, but really fun. One of our top vote getters had to be obvious. We're closing out with Arcadia here, and we're gonna pick the version from the 13th of December at Goosemas, night 1 in North Charleston, South Carolina. In this slot, it actually wasn't the outright winner of this slot, but we had to push that back to the encore because it got even more votes there. I'm sure you know what that is after I said that already, but Arcadia had 6 total votes here, picked by Joe, our friend Garrett again, Garn TD, JJ Fichter, Turn Clouds, CEO, and my wife, Sarah Sohani, picked it. She's more in touch than I am, so maybe she's right about Big Modern at Homedale after all.
go, Sarah.
So this Arcadia is excellent. Excellent. It's one of the best versions we've heard in years of Arcadia, in my opinion. So let's get into it a little bit. What do you think about this Arcadia being here, closing set 2, and being from Goosemas?
Well, we agreed. You and I talked about this the day after they played it, and we were like, "This is the best since Mission Ballroom." So I think Arcadia, this is where you want it. For me, I had on Arcadia in the encore particularly, and maybe we'll go through our individual sets at the end. But I had Arcadia in the encore, but I don't really care. To me, it's totally fine as the set closer. You can kind of interchange the song that ended up winning the encore with this, but yeah, this is the best version of Arcadia to me in recent years. They start off with that high clav where I've never heard Peter kind of spend that much time in that space before, and he just kind of hangs there for way longer than you're expecting, and they break out into this like Allman Brothers style jam that's just totally out of left field but absolutely works, and they crush it into this blissy energetic finish. Just love it, and I know you and I are both very hopeful that Arcadia starts getting some more life again in 2025 and this trend continues.
I'm optimistic about it, especially with the way that New Year's Eve was also a really strong version, and it had some upward momentum even before this Goosemas version, I would say, but it didn't quite hit on the scale of this version. Just outstanding stuff. Highly slept on, in my opinion, as a jam just because Hunger Sight was the same night and so excellent. And slightly later in the set, like it got overshadowed a little bit, but this is definitely one of the best jams of 2024 and really wanted to make sure that it got some love here. So that concludes set 2, Arcadia, monster banger, arguably the biggest song in the Goose catalog. You have to have it in a set list, and the people agreed. So, any thoughts on this set 2 before we get into a monster encore here?
So I don't really feel like I'm spoiling anything at this point. We've only got one song to go, and I think people have probably already deduced it. But the song that actually had more votes than Arcadia in this slot was Factory Fiction. So I just thought it was really, really interesting
And
that specifically with Factory Fiction, this song got all of its votes. I mean, all of them in 2 freaking slots. And it won by itself 2 slots because that's how much we all prefer it to be at the end of a show. And so I just thought it was kind of funny that we were all looking at that the exact same way. But set 2 as a whole, this set probably could not realistically exist anywhere in the known universe. I mean, it's got to be, I haven't done the measurements on set 2 alone, but it's got to be like 3 hours long or something insane. We'd need Goose to play till like 2 in the morning or something like that. It's probably not realistic at all, but if this set 2 doesn't blow your hair back, I don't know what will. This is just monster after monster.
yeah, it's an incredible assembly of some of the most unique jamming we saw all year, or just the most unique songs. And I think it's a great celebration of 2024 Goose and worth a listen with some great flow. I mean, you might have a few hiccups in terms of like a song abruptly ending and going to the next one, but in terms of how the songs flow with each other, I thought it worked out great. And we might get into that a little later, but I really thought this was my highlight of the overall Dream set list, personally. But you said it, man. Factory Fiction dominated the set 2 closer slot, dominated the encore slot even more. By far the most overwhelming favorite and most voted for song in any independent slot here in the encore. 15 votes. It's like literally insane when there's 77 total submissions. And let's shout out everyone who voted for it here. Friend of the pod, Darren, Lost Show, Show Rhonda, Clay Blyer, Trey Materatonda again, BLJ2416, Orseno, Mike's Unchained, Atlas Dog, Jax Parrish, Ben Lupin, CEO, Ben Chasing Satellites, SRP4, and Nick Needle. That's a mouthful of incredible people. Thank you for submitting to the Dream Set list for us. But holy cow, that's a lot of votes for Factory Fiction.
Yeah, I mean, 8 in the set 2 closer and 15 here for a total of 23 over 2 slots. Like, I mean, it's absolutely insane. But obviously, we're all pretty educated with Goose, so us smart people know where Factory belongs. So that's good. But just to call out, we also went with, as far as the version goes, we went with the Star Wars version from the Salt Shed, which there were a couple different versions called out here, but that was by far the leading vote getter. And I think that worked out well because that's our favorite version, both being Star Wars nerds and still having our minds blown that Rick would interpolate Duel of the Fates so perfectly and effortlessly. It was just an amazing moment of 2024. And I think you're leaving this show on the most positive note that you can leave on because this show finishes just absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, I think it's also fun just because Rick had like a really funny vocal flub early on in the song, and it's just kind of like a fun moment where you had to hear the band do a little bit of early improving in the song to get back on track. And Rick was like, let's just start this over. So get a little chuckle in the encore, leaving the venue with a laugh during the Dream Set list of 2024. And yeah, you said it. We're huge nerds here, and Rick is a closet huge nerd, even though he's jacked and beautiful and makes me question my sexuality. Uh, just Duel the
Yeah.
Fates, dude. Come on, let's go. The only good part about the Phantom Menace, you gotta squeeze it in if you can. Just incredible stuff. And you heard it early on in the song, but it was like not quite in the right pitch, and then Rick just kind of weasels his way, finds it into nailing the most energetic version of Duel of the Fates you'll ever hear, and get a shred fest to close it out. So, Factory Fiction rules. I'm an idiot who didn't pick it in my set list because I wanted to be different, and this is where it belongs. So I picked Dripfield personally. We'll get into our sets in a minute, but yeah, I was trying to be different a little bit, and I wound up being an idiot and not getting a single slot correct.
Well, hey, I tried to be a little bit different, and I put Factory at the second to last, the set closer slot, and it was popular there, but clearly not nearly as popular as it was in the encore. So, and definitely a great call out with you. I always forget that part, but when Rick says, "Shit, I'm going to take that again," it's absolutely makes me laugh every single time, no matter how many times I listen to it. And yeah, just what a fun, spontaneous moment.
They don't have flubs often, so it makes it a little noteworthy that it's such a clear one, but also they just kind of laugh it off, and you can hear the guys in the background even laughing a little bit. So just shout that out. Awesome version of Factory.
Yeah. Just real quick, like with the audience too, they give it back to him when he does come back and do that verse again. They scream the lyrics louder than they normally would. So it's just a great come together moment at a Goose show.
Oh, for sure. It's so much fun, and I do wish that Factory would rear its head a little more mid set sometimes, just because you're often time constrained towards the end of a show, and I think this version doesn't quite suffer from that affliction as much as some of the other ones we've heard lately, but still, I want like a 30-minute Factory, dude. Such a monster jam vehicle.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's absolutely perfect to end an epic run or an epic weekend or show. So, I mean, it fits really well here. But the downside to that, of course, is that you're not going to get it, see it stretch its legs as much as it, possibly could. And obviously, Factory has got tons of potential to be a massive jam vehicle, but maybe it does get a little bit limited, always falling near the end of a show with the time constraints. That's definitely a good point.
So, yeah, with all of that in mind and all of the songs selected here, what a show. What a monster dream set list here. Holy cow. What do you think about the overall flow of the show here, Mike? Any high level thoughts on the 13 songs that wound up being selected? It winds up being almost 5 hours of music, which would never happen. That would demolish the record for a two setter. But hey, we're dreaming here. So, what do you think would have worked here flow wise if you were in attendance for this? What worked the best? What didn't work for you? What would you have added or replaced real quick?
Yeah, just briefly. I won't say too much on it because I think I got most of my thoughts on it. I think for me personally, the Born Tumble EMG could use a little bit of adjusting, just because I feel like all of those are more like emotional, soul searching jams and songs. So I would have maybe debunched those a little bit, and then I like having the creatures from Goosemas in the set, but I think it could work better towards the end. And even if we took it out, like let's say like it went, Hunger Sight from Goosemas, Madhavan in set two, that could have made things a slightly bit better for me. But like I said, I've listened to this set start to finish 3 times now since Friday, I want to say, which has obviously been a lot of time of my life that I've been using to spend with this set list. But I think it plays really well overall. And I'm really excited for the listeners at home to get a chance to check it out, because I think, however long it takes them to make it through, I think when you do get through the show start to finish, you're going to maybe have some small quibbles like I do that could have improved things slightly, but it's already at a really great place. And I think this show plays out really well. So I couldn't be more happy with how our first attempt at this worked out. And I think it'll be even better next year. What about you?
I gotta say, like I put together my set list really thoughtfully, I thought, and then this wound up being better than even what I put together. So the people know better than me as a host. Maybe I should resign after
No,
missing literally every slot.
no, you're not allowed to resign.
But I thought that was terrific. I don't necessarily agree totally about the flow. I think maybe it's just too many like monster jams, and having that break up with some shorter songs is kind of nice sometimes, just to kind of get a little bit of a breather, or hear a little bit more of Rick's vocals being highlighted or Peter's vocals being highlighted at points in the show. There's a lot of jamming here, and we're here for it, but maybe it struggled by not having enough slots, quote unquote, because we anticipated there'd be a lot of jams picked here.
Yeah, and I guess like the catch 22 with that is, if we went to like 15 songs next year, for example, does the set list then turn into a 6 hour set? Like it can keep going up as much as we want it to, but this already wound up being like kind of a wild experience. And like, I can't emphasize enough, like this set is great as it is, because I mean, even if you just look at it, like you're going to go through this and hear the best Born of 2024, the best Tumble of 2024, the best Hunger Site of 2024, the best Drip Field maybe ever. So you've just got all these standout tracks all in one place. So again, could not be happier with how our first time doing this worked out.
No, this was a really fun idea, and I just want to shout you out, Mike. A lot of this was your idea, buddy, and I just want to shout you out, Mike, because you did a lot of heavy lifting on this, and you were crunching numbers for us, and put together an amazing concept. So, shout you out, Mike.
If everyone at home can hear, my co-host is just a total sweetheart, and I love him.
Every now and then I can get sappy. So, real quick, because this is a problem we have every week. We have so much fun talking goose, we wind up going long, I feel like, lately.
Yeah.
But wanted to kind of shout out some of the crunch numbers and give some high level thoughts overall on some of the submissions we got. So, in terms of the most overall picked songs, start off with Big Modern with 39 overall picks out of 77 submissions. Holy cow, that's crazy. Then Arcadia was next with 34 picks. Dripfield was third with 30. You said it. Factory Fiction got almost all of its votes late in the set, but it had 29 overall picks at the fourth most picked song. Actually tied with Hunger Site as well with 29 picks. And then next up, the brutal cut, Madhuvan, the sixth most picked song overall, did not make the set because it was so evenly spread with 27 picks. Closely following that was Creatures with 26 picks. That might surprise some.
That surprised me.
Yeah, Creatures very popular. And Tumble right after that with 25 picks. And then next brutal cut, Elmeg the Wise with 21 overall picks. So they're a pretty big gap when you think about the total summed up numbers. Elmeg with 21 picks. And then we follow that up with Arrow, Born, and then two brutal cuts here again. Give It Time and Into the Mist with 20 votes each. So kind of leapfrogging off of that real quick, let's talk about the most picked songs that didn't make the set list. We talked about a few already. Madhuvan, sixth most pick overall. Elmeg the Wise, ninth most picked overall, didn't make the set. And then Give It Time and Into the Mist, both tied for the 12th most picked overall, didn't make it. And Drive had 18 votes as well. 16th most picked overall song, just barely missed the cut. Interesting to note that there were two songs that made the Dream set that had less picks than all of these songs, but just won their individual slots. So let me quit yapping here. Mike, any high level thoughts on the most picked songs overall and the songs that didn't make the cut?
I mean, for me, the things that jumped out right away, my most surprising omissions, and this is just like songs that I just consider like staples of Goose, but I was definitely surprised most by Madhuvan and Drive being missing, especially when there were several really high level versions of both from 2024 that I know people were really big fans of. But then also no Wisteria, no Into the Mist, no Pancakes. All five of those, I would say to me, are like very big standouts. And kind of like right on the edge of those, Earthling or Alien as well probably would be my sixth song that I'm most surprised to not see here. But you know, every time I've gone down this set list start to finish, you start trying to look at like what you would bump, and you start immediately getting into just endless situations of like, okay, I could put Wisteria in here, but I'm cutting something else that I very much love. So this was challenging.
Super challenging. And maybe that's a reflection on how people felt about the songs as jam vehicles in 2024. It's hard to say, but even songs like Thatch, like they didn't make the cut. They weren't even in the top 25. Like, it really surprised me. Another one that really kind of surprised me was I was not expecting it, but Loose Ends got a surprising amount of votes here. Got 13 votes, which awesome. Like I love a Loose Ends, don't get me wrong, but it beat out songs like Earthling or Alien, like you said, Rockdale, Travelers, Feel It Now. Like I was more voted than that. So really surprised me there. Really going to be interested to see how much this shifts. A lot of very popular songs wound up making the set list, which is a testament to Goose just writes incredible songs and their cream rises to the top with this fan base. But interested to see if that shifts if we do this again next year, which we will, and what kind of flows in and out, because I have to imagine songs like Factory Fiction are going to be hard to knock off their perch.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting too. I don't want to like try and predict too much because obviously there's going to be a lot of Goose between now and then when we would potentially do it next January. But it'll be interesting to see if how this bracketing of songs ends up influencing how people vote next year. Like because Factory so much ran away with the encore, maybe listeners try and intentionally go a different route and, subvert expectations next year for this. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see like if there's any reaction, or maybe people even get like a more of a concerted effort to get specific songs like Into the Mist or ones that missed it in Madhavan, things like that. Do people prioritize it just to get it in? I don't know. I could see a scenario where a lot of people vote for Madhavan as like a set one opener just to ensure that it makes it into the set, because I know it's crushed me that it's not in the set. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see like what kind of reaction people have from this first one.
Yeah, totally. It really is surprising to not get a monster song like Madhuvan in there. It didn't surprise me as much to see something like Elmeg, which we normally expect to see. It didn't quite have like the ascendant year that it's had in the past, where it's a rarer staple, but with some monster jamming behind it. But I thought overall, like the selections wound up really reflecting what the people wanted for the most part. Just a few tough cuts, which is going to happen regardless of what we do. Nothing really surprising that wasn't in the top 22 overall made the set, and there's 13 slots. So really quick to shout those out. The songs with the least overall picks that made the set list, we kind of teased this earlier, but Everything Must Go was the least voted for song overall with only 14 total picks, but it just dominated 2 slots, like we said. 22nd most overall picked song, and then Hot Love dominated that opener slot. Had 15 total picks, though, 19th most pick overall song in this exercise. Any thoughts on that real quick before we get into kind of our favorite set list and some of our favorite picks?
No, I mean, you kind of covered it all. It's very interesting, the slot preferences of people, because it definitely played out that way, that people either wanted certain songs in a specific slot or they weren't generally voting for them in other slots. So it'll be interesting to see how loyal people are to keeping songs in certain areas of a set next year, and if that keeps up.
Yeah, agree. So, real quick, since we're going a little long, let's talk through what our favorite opener we saw someone pick was in this exercise and shout them out real quick.
Yeah, so just going rapid fire. Best opener I saw, Mike's Unchained, whoever you are. Just amazing work. Boldly starting off with Help Slip Frank. Just extremely bold call, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I love that. I wound up going with our friend of the pod, Darren. He picked the Killing Moon to open. That's a great tone setter. Really bold to start with a cover. It's interesting we both picked covers because Goose just absolutely demolishes them, and very different sides of the spectrum in terms of covers.
1,000%.
Next up, what was your favorite set closer you saw someone pick?
Not necessarily a closer, but again, Struce, whoever you are, only person I believe to choose a fifth of Beethoven at any slot in this set, and choosing it for their encore closer, which I just thought was absolutely fascinating. And yeah, bravo on that, because it's just very creative.
Super creative and so fun. Like, that's always a treat when it pops up. I want to see that live myself. So great call out.
Same.
I went with a little cheekier of a pick myself. I picked Ben Lupin, who picked How It Ends as a set closer for set 2. And I think it's just cheeky and a shout out to a song that we're hopefully going to see a lot more of in 2025. So shout out to How It Ends.
Great call. Yeah, totally.
Next up, let's go with the most surprising or most original choice or run you saw on a set list that you want to shout out.
So let me scroll over to this set list in specific, because I feel like I have to read the entire thing out. But Rivka Yoko Ono, whoever you are, this is the most bizarre set list I've ever seen. I'm not hating, it's just bizarre. We go 726 into Magic Carpet Ride, Spirit of the Dark Horse, Jeff Engboard, All I Need, Spirit of the Dark Horse again, Atlantic Sea, Drive, Tumble, Big Modern, This Old Sea, Elmeg, and then Fish in the Sea Encore. There are parts of that set list that I like, so I'm not going to hate on it at all, but just absolutely the most random made up set list I think I've ever seen in my life.
I mean, pretty obviously a troll based off of the comments we got, but shout out to you. Thank you for submitting, because that took quite a bit of time for folks who decided to participate. We got a nice comment at the end of that submission that said, "Grow up," in all caps. And we like pretending that we're young at heart. So we're going to continue to make some crazy concept episodes, and hopefully you participate in all of them. I mean, I'm going to pick the same thing because that's just outstandingly weird, and I'm here for it. So, You thought you were trolling. You're getting a shout out, so I guess you got what you wanted. But also, great choices.
Yeah.
Let's say second to last up. Let's go with our favorite set list overall, and I think we both have the same pick here. So I kind of hinted at it earlier, but what do you have here, Mike?
Yeah, Darren's getting all the love today. Buddy from the pod. His set two is just absolutely outstanding, and I'm just gonna have to like actually scroll over to this one again as well and just read it off in order because I just feel like it's kind of a masterpiece. So he starts off with Help on the Way, and then we go into Big Modern, and then he goes into Slipknot, and then Hunger Site Dripfield back to back, which is just absolutely amazing combo, and then Franklin's Tower, and then a Factory Fiction encore. And what I really loved about this was one, how he wove in Help Slip Frank kind of effortlessly in between a lot of Goose classics, and it just seems to flow very, very well. But he also smartly didn't pick any versions for Help Slip Frank so that we could get a little bit more improv on them than we did at Goose Miss, which was probably the only complaint about that when they were played. So I just thought that was a really cool way to weave the theme into set two and still keep some Goose classics up front. And yeah, that was my favorite set run I saw.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw that set, I was like, this is really would be really cool to be at. So I immediately latched onto that, and then I saw it was Darren. I was like, of course it's Darren because he's constantly messaging us and sending us amazing thoughts on songs and shows. So shout out to you, Darren. Really quick, I also thought a really cool set list. I thought about it that had some repeats in it, thinking about reprises that come up in shows. Just want to shout it out. Trey Materatanda here picked a set that started with Thatch, goes into Big Modern, then Dim Lights, really fun. Feel It Now, Wisteria Lane, and then Arrow set one closer, and then set two, opening with Bob Dawn, then a Big Modern reprise here. My Mind Has Been Consumed by Media, then a Not Alone, Eminence Front, and Jive 2 set two closer with a Factory Fiction encore. They had a really interesting mix of picks that really aligned with the Dream set list, but also some really unique moments. And I think including a reprise like that is a really fun idea because we see that a lot at shows. So shout out to you, Trey Materatanda.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out because it's very eclectic. And I definitely thought about making a Big Modern sandwich at some point, but I didn't want to rob another song in my set list. So I wasn't brave enough. But kudos to you for being brave to make that call. I think that's great. Just want to shout out really quickly another honorable mention Ben Chasing Satellites. He went Cap Drive, Raleigh Dogs, Lily's Tiger, Creatures from Troutdale, Mist from Cap Arcadia, Portland Wisteria, Fox Half Step, Greek Drip, Give It Time, Cap Modavon, and Star Wars Fiction. That is a really outstanding set as well, and I was a very big fan of that.
Yeah, definitely. There were so many outstanding picks here. I wish we could shout out all of you. It would just take us hours to analyze each of your sets, but we are so grateful for all of the incredible submissions. I know it took quite a bit of time out of each of your days to come up with a submission for this, and so we're super grateful. And I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to shout you out specifically, but know that we looked at every single song, every single person, and we're just floored by the total submissions and how creative your sets were. So with that, just really quick, we thought everyone would want to know what our sets were. Let's hear yours first, Mike, because mine is really chalk and not as interesting as yours.
I don't know about that, man. You had a really good set. I looked at yours a couple times over this process, and I thought you did a really good job. So I don't necessarily agree with that. But let me scroll over to my set here. So I went Big Modern Opener, Draconian Meter Maid, Into the Mist, Rosewood Heart, Thatch, Arrow, Madavon, Hunger Site, Born, Dripfield. My only cover, Get Down Tonight, because I think that jam is slept on. Empress Closer, and then Arcadia Encore. So that was how I did it. What about you, Alex?
Dude, I would have been so happy with your set list. Just so fun and some great song choices, highlighting some of the new stuff, paying homage to the classics. I thought you did a terrific job of balancing out. Even the cover selection, I think, is just perfect. But I went a little more standard, I would say, for 2024 a little bit. I went with a Big Modern set one opener, Pancake slot two, a Western Sun, then mid set Arcadia, Redbird in slot five of set one, and a Hunger Sight set one closer. And then open up set two with Thatch, Get a Feel It Now to follow that up. Rockdale mid-set. Then Cool It Down a little bit with Fish in the Sea as the cover choice. Then a Creatures in set 2, slot 5, where you were talking about how much you love it. And then a Madhuvan set 2 closer with a Dripfield encore. So I really wanted to make sure that some of these big bangers were highlighted because they all had monster years.
Yeah, and we didn't really talk much about it, but Redbird, another one, kind of shocked to not see make it anywhere in the playlist. That's a very beloved jam vehicle for most fans of Goose. So that was another one that just never really got close in an individual slot, but still kind of shocked me not to see it. But I think that's just kind of like the game we're playing with Goose's catalog just being so amazing. Anytime you try and limit how many songs they're going to play, there's going to be stuff on the table, unfortunately. But great set, man.
Yeah, and I was surprised a little bit by there was a lot of covers selected, but not a lot wound up standing out. Like even a song that's really popular, like Shamalama Ding Dong, only got 3 votes in this thing. I was expecting to see a lot more of that, or like Sinnerman or something like that. But yeah, just really interesting that the most voted for cover, I believe, was Franklin's Tower.
Yeah, I think that definitely stood out to me as well. That I think a lot of people struggled like I did. I didn't want to, it sounds stupid to say waste a slot on a cover because Goose is the best cover band in the known universe. But at the same time, you're trying to squeeze as many heavy hitter Goose songs into this as you possibly can. So even picking the one cover that I did, while I'm doing that, I'm thinking about what classic Goose song am I leaving out. So it is a struggle when you put constraints on this stuff.
And sorry, I was wrong. It was second most picked behind Fish in the Sea, but very close. Franklin's Tower. But yeah, super tough to like pick out an individual cover or a song that you want to fit a slot that usually only fits in one slot. So it made this a really tricky exercise. And our job is way easier than Goose has it every night trying to decide sets for us on the road. So
Amen.
really, again, really want to thank you all for the thought you put into this because it's as outstanding effort, and the response was incredible. We only expected literally a quarter of this in our wildest dreams. So shout out to you as the listeners.
Yeah, we have very, very smart listeners on this show. That's what I've learned the most from this experience is that we've got some of the most knowledgeable fans in the business following this podcast because everyone just absolutely crushed it on this assignment.
Most definitely. So any final thoughts overall on the submissions, the set list itself, anything you might want to tweak next time we do this or anything like that?
So, we'll talk about this obviously as we get closer to next year. Obviously, a lot of live Goose coming up before then, but the only things that I had thought about was potentially adjusting like how we handle the tiebreakers. Like maybe next year we'll have a little bit of a longer run up, and when we identify what the tiebreakers are, maybe giving y'all an opportunity to break those ties for us. That may be something that we look at. And I'm also going to be like trying to rack my brain on how ways to maybe make it more equitable for certain songs that are very popular but people tend to only imagine placing them in 1 or 2 slots. Try and figure out a way to make it more equitable across the board. But I think that this worked out really great. I'm going to keep listening to this set because I think it ends up just working out really well. So anything that we may tweak is not a reflection on how this went because this went amazing.
It went so well, and I agree with you completely. If we had more run up and more foresight, we definitely want to include you on the tiebreakers next time versus us having to kind of do a rough methodology off of total votes and stuff like that. But also, I think a lot of the problems that we're talking about might be alleviated by telling your friends about the show and having them participate on the dream set list. And more submissions means less variance and, more votes getting pumped in that will hopefully, rise the songs that deserve to be in those slots to the top.
1,000%.
So with that, I think this wraps up this episode. We have the Milwaukee run coming up here shortly. We'll both be at, and the winter tour starts in just a week from when we're recording, not even. So really exciting stuff. We'll be recapping those shows after the fact for you next week. Not sure when because we'll be traveling right after the Milwaukee run, but we'll be sure to recap that and then wrap up with the rest of the short winter tour here just after that. And just want to thank you all for listening again. Thank you for your submissions on the stream set list. Our brains are melted after reviewing all that data, obviously. And we're so thrilled that you felt excited enough and compelled enough to participate in our first attempt at something like this. And we really hope to continue it through the years and have more and more participation. just absolutely blown away by the growth the last few months here. And again, shouting out our listeners. You're the smartest, most beautiful people in the world, and you're perfect.
Yeah, we love you all so much. Thank you so much again for the participation and flying to Milwaukee on Thursday. So if you see either one of us out there, please come say hi. We'd love to meet you. I think we'll both have stickers on us to hand out. So love to engage with as many people in the community as we possibly can. And just looking forward to hanging out with all you wonderful people in Milwaukee for 3 nights this week.
Yeah, man. Really looking forward to it. And want to thank you again one last time. And thanks for checking us out on our socials at Slow Ready Pod. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Later.